Well, welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. And I think Louise, who's my beautiful guest today, I think you're the first person that I've interviewed who's physically sitting in South Africa. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's wonderful to be here.
The joys of time zones and technology, and it really, it takes me all over the world. And I think you're my first heart-centered leader to be in South Africa. So how exciting is that?
It truly does take you around the world.
It really does. And I always say that's the blessing of COVID. I think it blew open the bandwidth of our connection with people, which is my definition, honoring that connection. And even though it's virtual, it's just lovely to meet you. And I'll say it while we're recording. I was complimenting how lovely your lipstick is. So I think we're good to go. We've got everything in place here.
Absolutely.
So Louise, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I run a leadership consultancy. Actually, it's a future-focused conscious leadership consultancy, which I founded in London in 2005. So that's a long time ago. And I'll be 19 in May, so I still get to claim the teenager bit. But the interesting thing about it is the world has changed enormously during that time. And so have my clients, and so too have I. And it's been an extraordinary journey. And I essentially do three things, which haven't really changed a great deal, although the focus has changed a lot over the years. And that is I coach leaders one-to-one, and I speak professionally, so keynotes and workshops and lectures in business schools. And I design and put together masterclasses and programs for the executive teams that I work with. So kind of three, I guess, the magic triangle there. And some other stuff in between. I work with some behavioral science tools, which are always really useful in today's world of work. And over the years, I've sort of taken on different things as I've seen where the market is going. I've always had this ability to connect the dots. I think it's because I'm just ridiculously curious. And I've lived in different countries, and I think it sort of sparked a deep curiosity for how things work and what's going on in the world and how something somewhere else may impact our business today and well into the future. And as a result of that, I studied futures and foresight. So I think in 2017, last year, I went back for a refresher because I think COVID just numbed us all into a different state of mind.
Yeah.
And things like complexity and a few other bits and pieces here and there. So I guess I'm always on the lookout for what can help my clients to make sense of what's going on in the world and navigate things with much more ease. Because one of the trickiest things that we're dealing with today is decision-making, both on a macro level and also those minor micro decisions that actually are creating the future that we're going to need to live in. And not only are we creating the future, but the context will be different when we get there. And I think that's kind of the major shift in thinking that we're experiencing around us, that people are waking up to today.
I join you in being a woman who's ridiculously curious. It's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show when you reached out. And I love your trifecta. And I think it segues nice into my first leadership question. You talk about specializing in conscious leadership, and I'm a yoga teacher as well. And I think all the remnants of our life journey, all the extrinsic work that we've done in our roles, et cetera, play a part in conscious leadership. I would love for you to explain a little bit more of why it's purpose-driven and how you're always looking to the future. Because when you talk, it resonates with me in that people can hand you or even me problems and we see solutions, we see resolution, we see conflict negotiation. So there's so many trifectas here. I would love for you to break it down and just kind of share what that means and maybe some of the action items that spurred you to become the trifecta that you are today.
Yeah, it's such a great question, Deb. When I started my business, I started in investment banking and then technology, and then global executive search, which is kind of where the people golden thread kicked in. And one of the things that I needed was a coaching qualification. So I'd been coaching for about 5 years. And I got to 2010 and I thought, I've got to get this qualification. But every time I looked at a route to ICF, which, obviously, holds its weight anywhere in the world, I kept thinking, yeah, great, but, what am I going to get out of this myself? And is it a deeply conscious program? And then consciousness coaching found me, and of course it was an ICF qualification. So I took that route, and it was a much longer, probably much more expensive route than perhaps doing a quick down and dirty qualification. And it was sort of a couple of years of 4-day deep dives. And I just instantly knew that at the foundation of all things is consciousness. We are consciousness. The universe is conscious. And everything that we deal with is we can think of it in that way. So why not start with the foundation of all things? It makes much more sense than layering on some flavor of leadership, which of course every year changes. I think in the last couple of years we've had empathetic leadership and courageous leadership, and I would imagine that we really should be talking about compassionate leadership and all of the other sort of flavors, but really at the foundation of all of it is heart, connection with mind, body, soul, all of that stuff. And it's consciousness. Yeah. So it was just a wonderful foundation for, and in fact, is the golden thread that runs through absolutely everything I do, whether I'm dealing with an executive team, grappling with supply chains, and, we're looking at futures to work with that, or complexity, or whatever the case may be. Yeah. It's still the foundation of everything. So I weave it into absolutely everything that I do.
I love that.
Yeah, it's feeds the soul. I mean, I love the fact that you're a yoga teacher. Yoga's my thing too. And I think that we've got to take care of I'm kind of reluctant to throw glib phrases around like whole selves, but actually that's what it is. We need to take care of ourselves at all levels. And often it's the first thing that we forego is taking care of every aspect of who we are so that we can better serve and actually add value to, those around us in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, I love heart-centered leadership. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, because it's alignment, it's conscious alignment, it's organic, it's pure. In my heart-centered leadership playbook, I wrote a whole chapter on managing the inner leader. And I've had so many leaders around the globe say, I needed this. What a great self-audit. If we don't manage the inner leader, how can we do the leadership work and be conscious while we're doing it? So I love that. Do you see why I wanted you on the show, Louise? There's so much serendipity here. We do. Absolutely. Now, my second question has permanent residency on the show. I've asked almost 300 leaders this question. Candor and humor is allowed, but it allows the funness to show the connectivity of who we are as humans. So share with us what imperfections that Louise brings to her conscious, heart-centered leadership every day.
All of them, Deb. Absolutely all of them. I think, to not have a sense of humor in the corporate paradigm or in life, it's just crazy. And it brings a lightness, a light touch to things. So if we can actually find the ridiculousness in, what we're dealing with and the things that we keep doing, which are just crazy, then I think we're on to something.
Absolutely.
And I use a lot of humor in my interactions with people, because if we can actually look at what we're doing with a light touch and with that humor, it just lifts it. We don't need to go down the rabbit hole of why often. Rather, we need to have a look at, okay, so that it is what it is, and let's move on to the what. And often I'll get up, especially when I'm delivering keynotes, and one of the first things I'll say is, talking about self-awareness, because as you say, we need to know ourselves. well enough to be able to make conscious decisions rather than having our buttons pushed and behaving like Pavlov's dogs. And, often the whole sort of mantra is know thyself and then get thyself the hell out of the way, because really to have our ego front and center of all our interactions almost dictates the difficulty that we're going to have with other people and situations. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. So imperfections, plenty. And actually, the wonderful thing is when working I always work with coaches and mentors, it's a happy place for me. But, talking to a really good friend or something, and suddenly you have that aha moment, oh my gosh, I'm doing that ridiculous thing again. And it's always a moment of humor. So, yeah, it's a good...
You're bringing up a memory of my Irish Nana that I often talk about on the show. And I wrote a whole chapter in my book on her as well. And I remember when I started keynoting and I'd say to her, like, my stomach, like the butterflies. And she said, that's good. They're there to remind you that your ego will not be going on stage and just to keep you in check. And it's like one of those mnemonics that you learn from an elementary school teacher. And I never, ever forgot that. And I always, before I step on that stage, the butterflies are there. I can hear her voice in my head. And it's like, I'm going to serve. I'm consciously serving. What gift do I want to bestow? So I love your answer. And I love that you have all these imperfections. I'm joining you. Welcome to that land of imperfection. Okay, here's my third leadership question. You talk about a handful of future-focused lenses of the world that leaders need to navigate, because we're very much still in uncertainty and complexity. And I hate using the acronym VUCA, but we're still there. Where do you find the awareness to land in the present moment to know how and where to serve, to navigate out of that with your clients? So speaking, how does Louise stay in that forefront of habit of thinking in order to serve and bring her clients in that same space? Because that's powerful.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Essentially, when I talk about future-focused leadership, a lot of people think it's just another flavor, and it isn't. It involves frameworks, models, or tools. It involves a lens on whatever it is that we're actually dealing with. And there's some really powerful lenses that are rooted in academia that have been brought into the here and now, courtesy of some really brilliant people and institutions, and being democratized for all of us. So I think futures thinking, foresight, it's definitely having a moment. And if we consider the circumstances that we're in, I love the fact that you mentioned complexity and uncertainty. And there's an amazing correlation between, we are dealing with complexity, but how many people know what's complex and what's complicated?
Yeah.
In complexity, we really should just watch and wait and stalk it until it reveals more of itself so that we can actually take action. Whereas if it's just complicated, we can throw frameworks, models, tools, experts, and money at it, and we can get it sorted. But to know the difference, and I think a lot of leaders treat complexity as if it were a complicated situation, and that's, of course, where all of the major errors are made. Yeah. So really the idea is developing these lenses for ourselves so that we can create this space in our minds to be able to assess what's going on and then critically act in the way that we need to. So complexity is and be able to appreciate, what am I actually dealing with here? There's also an incredible amount of research and some amazing papers to show that wherever we have complexity, we have uncertainty. And uncertainty produces an acute stress response. So that's not just, I'm really stressed by this, it's, I'm overwhelmed or it's all a bit too much. Mm-hmm. But acute stress is fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And when we consider that every single situation we go into in a business setting, and we look around us at the team we're with or the group of people that we're with, 38% of those people are reporting burnout symptoms, and 50% are reporting mental health issues. So suddenly we've got an acute stress response in a room full of people. many of whom do not have the brain chemicals, because neuroscience plays such a big part in this, to be able to think more broadly, to think of possibilities, to open up that kind of window in their minds. And really, these tools are a way of creating that space for ourselves so that we make better decisions. So that's the one lens. The other, of course, is conscious leadership and team coherence. And we've talked a little bit about that. The third, of course, futures and foresight. I mentioned that before. And there are some amazing courses that people can do. And of course, if we're going to bring that kind of thinking into our organizations, there are brilliant, qualified, degreed practitioners who are worth talking to and actually worth going on a journey with, because futures is consistent. It's not just, the future isn't here. We haven't created it yet. And I think we have far more power over the future than a lot of people realize. It's not just happening to us. We are in every moment creating it. And then, of course, there's agile thinking and innovative behaviors. Innovation has been the theme for the last 10 years. And yet we're always talking about innovation as if it's a process. Actually, it's the outcome. We start with ideation and, of course, then we have application. And the result, the byproduct, is something innovative, a product or service, whatever it may be. But how do we help people to think in innovative ways? And how do we create the conditions in our organization that allow it? Because often we'll, embark on these major innovation projects, and yet there's no psychological safety in an organization, or, the team lead keeps stealing the best ideas and claiming them, and people just lose hope. So all of these lenses are absolutely vital. And of course, there's a lot more that goes into each of them in terms of how we think. I'm absolutely convinced that how we think, rather than what we can learn what to think, but how we think is the key. And it's that will dictate our ability to actually create the future that we desire. So all of those things are absolutely vital. And they're things that I've been delivering to organizations over quite a long period of time, and finally put a masterclass together on that future-focused masterclass journey for leadership teams. And of course, eventually wrote the book, because I thought, well, I've got to explain this a little bit better. So that's kind of how that happened. But a great question. Thanks,
Jo. There's so many nuggets in there. Neuroscience is my background. So when you drop the strategy of metacognition, how we think about thinking, that is the wheelhouse that I also spend a lot of time in. And, even to deflate the elephant with you today, and it's not just what's going on within an organization. I mean, you leave work and we're living in a very heavy world. So it's like we're in this, deep valley of stress that's hard to get out. But when you can control that metacognition, it makes the world of difference. But like anything else, it takes time, effort, and strategy. And with leadership, a lot of patience. So yeah, we could spend the whole day talking about this.
Absolutely. Well, you said something really important there. I almost called the book that I published recently Context. And then everybody laughed at me and said, oh, wow, it sounds way too academic. So I had to find a better name for it, because that's exactly what it is. And, it's not a context we leave behind in the office. It's context, what's going on in the world, what's going on in society. And it's constantly changing, and it will continue to do so. And of course, it impacts everything. So unless we had that, we mentioned curiosity early on, and we can do that without attachment. And sometimes I sort of lean on this sort of Buddhist non-attachment. How do we actually assess what's going on without being dragged into every single minuscule detail? And I think that's a part of conscious leadership development.
It is. And conscious leadership continues in our life. It's our life and our leadership. All right, Here's my last question. This is such a great conversation. So you talk about conscious self-awareness is at the heart of personal growth and development and our ability to connect with others. You claim it's where the magic happens. And I think we've touched upon that. But is there anything else that you'd like to add to it for our last leadership question? the connection is the key, but what are some of the remnants that make the magic?
When you get a group of conscious leaders together, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
So typically in teams, you've got a bunch of stuff going on and everybody's focused on what they need to get done, the pressure that they're individually under, the impact of what's going on at home, what's going on in the environment, all of the stuff, the context that we're in, as we mentioned. And yes, if we can leave that at the door, I think it's one of the first things I learned in coaching was literally put my ego in a bag and I leave it at the door, either, in my mind's eye or physically in my mind's eye, depending on the environment. But if we can do that, if we can actually make ourselves available to other people to really listen, and that's something I get into deeply as well, is what does it mean to listen deeply? We talk about active listening, but for me, it's more about listening deeply. What are we listening for? Are we listening for what's not said, what is said, what the circumstances might be? Are we curious enough to ask questions without judgment? And I think when you are able to create that environment between that kind of team coherence, suddenly you do have something magic happening. And it doesn't really matter what happens, that team is able to work through that challenge and find the opportunity in it and turn it around. So, yeah, it's magic is kind of a crazy word. What is magic? Is it palpable? Can we measure it?
Absolutely. It is. Magic is magical. That's it.
Well, yeah. Do we find it on KPIs? No. But we know it when we feel it.
Yeah.
We know it when people have presence and impact. And as a team, when they're cohesive and coherent. So it's the difference between good and great.
It is. I always love calling it intuition management.
Right.
That sixth sense, right? That proprioception that it's my gut. And we could do a whole show on that. So yeah. I'm going to switch to my Fab Four, and these are just 4 fun questions so our listeners can get a little more conscious about who Louise is outside of her greatness as a professional. Okay, question number 1. If you could distill your life philosophy into one guiding principle or mantra, what would it be and how has it shaped your journey?
Yeah, it would be stay curious, for sure. And it's completely shaped my journey. So, it's led me to living in different countries, into taking on things that just felt right, into working with unusual clients in unusual situations. So, but for me, therein lies the joy. It's, if I had to do the same thing repetitively every day, it's probably not my thing. But therein lies the joy, and keep learning. Stay curious, keep learning.
I love that. Okay, question 2. What's a misconception about your area of expertise or industry that you're passionate about debunking, and why is it important to you?
Yeah, future-focused leadership is not a flavor. It's not the flavor of the moment. It may sound like it. However, what's packed into that are a whole bunch of really smart layers. And once we've got those layers, the way of understanding the world, we're able to create the freedom and the space and relieve a lot of the pressure and stress that a lot of people experience. So have a look at it, delve into it. There's so much there to learn. And yet it's not difficult to learn. It's, simple and not difficult. And it will give you the ability to manage whatever comes your way so much better.
I love that. Okay, question 3. Tell us a moment of failure or setback in your career or personal life that ended up being a crucial turning point or learning experience for you.
Yeah, that's a great one, actually. After I worked for a listed firm in executive search, I then co-founded an executive search firm in London with a couple of business partners who I'd known for quite some time. And we purely focused on the venture capital investment market and the firms, the startups that they'd invested in. And it was a brilliant, vibrant business. And then I read a book by a Newsweek economist. I think I've still got it in my bookcase, something about the downfall of the new economy. And the interesting thing is that all the signs were there. I think as a retained executive search consultant, you feel at first, the retainers stop, the money stops flowing, almost a canary in the minefield. And there was a decision to make: shut the business and pay redundancy, and so that people had 3 months to find themselves another role, or just run it, keep going in the hope that the market would turn. And my decision was to shut it, but I had opposition from my business partners. Anyway, we shut it. And I remember sitting in my lawyer's office in absolute tears. I just could not believe that, friendships of 10 years could dissolve in a minute over this ridiculous situation. And it was a really, really tough time. But looking back, I realized that there was no way I could leave people in the lurch. And as tricky as it was, I had to trust my intuition that things weren't going to turn around. Mm-hmm. And a call like that is a tricky one because there's no evidence. The future hasn't happened yet. I could have called it wrong, completely wrong. It doesn't matter the wrong or right part, but just to stick with that sense of what's right and do the right thing, that was a great lesson.
I love that. That's a great story. Okay, my last question. Beyond all of your professional achievements, what's a hobby or interest or passion of yours that might surprise our listeners? And how does it complement or contrast with your personal persona?
So lots of creative endeavors. I studied art, as a student, but didn't pick up a paintbrush for about 17 years. And then I painted furiously for about a year and ended up selling quite a lot. And then I went on a break. I'd been moving countries. I was waiting for my furniture, and I landed up at St. Martin's in London, the fashion design school. And I did, I think, 6 weeks of courses. And handbag design was my favorite. So that's another little passionate hobby. And in between, I think I made some jewelry. And so I've always been hugely creative, and I love making things. I think my secret desire is to have my own workshop in a basement somewhere, and make furniture, whatever takes my fancy at the time. So
I love that.
There's like creative itch that's constantly there.
Well, Louise, thank you for being a heart-centered leader and for sharing your time and your wisdom with our listeners today. And I'm going to ask you to finish this sentence to close out the show. Heart-centered leadership is?
Within all of us.